going on, guys? Kirk here from MotoGear TV. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. Today we're going to be discussing the overall reliability of the OG M2. I'm going to give you guys some insights into some of the maintenance items you should look out for when owning this car and some of the costs associated with it. So stay tuned, let's get started. Now, when it comes to reliability, especially for BMWs, there's a variety of things you can look out for. Specifically for this video, I want to focus on the N55B motor that comes in the OG M2. Now, unlike the S55 variant, for the most part, in my personal experience and my personal opinion, the reliability has been pretty good. Now, just to give you guys some quick stats, this is a 2017 BMW M2, the OG M2 with the N55B motor in it. I've had the car for about 3 years and it currently has about 59,000 miles on it. Overall, the ownership experience has been pretty good for the most part. Now, this isn't to say that I haven't had any hiccups along the way. I've taken this car to the track, autocross, daily driver for me. And as you guys can see, it's definitely not stuck. Now, with doing a lot of upgrades, you run into two different things. The first one being, if you decide to improve the power and the handling and the performance, some of the reliability is going to be suffered. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing. For me personally, I did a lot of things that were preventative maintenance, such as upgrading the charge pipe, upgrading the intercooler, upgrading my thermostat, and a lot of these things have allowed the car to perform longer and better, especially for me, taking it to the track. The downside of doing those mods, especially with tunes, running a downpipe, things like that, I can run into other issues later down the line. Now, specifically in my personal experience, I haven't run into too major of issues regarding this car. It's really going to vary depending on the car that you have. Now, before we get into this, I just wanted to highlight that I'm going to be going over things that can affect BMW owners or BMW engines in general, but I still want to be very focused on the N55B motor that comes in the OG M2. Now, for quick reference, the N55B motor came in the 2016 to 2018 BMW M2s. After that, in 2019, it switched over to the S55 motor that's found in the M2 competition. A lot of folks will debate whether the N55 motor was better than the S55. I'm not really here to debate that. More so, I just want to go over some of the things you would expect or would likely experience, especially when having the OG M2. Now, let me start off by saying this. BMW ownership can have its ups and downs, but for the most part, especially through my journey, I've seen more positives and negatives. It's important to note that ownership can vary no matter what car you have. The experience can be good or bad. A lot of times, ownership neglect and maintenance upkeep is a big fault in how some of these motors perform. For me personally, I've always preached to having maintenance done first before going into performance mods. And in kind of planning out how I wanted to build this car, I did want to focus on things that were not only going to improve the performance of the motor, but also improve the reliability. To start off, let me go off by saying no matter if you have this engine, N54, B58, S55, and so on, maintenance is key, especially if you want to improve the longevity of your motor. Now, when it comes to routine maintenance, there's a couple of things you can look out for with doing. The first and most important one to me, I think, would be the oil changes. Now, you can do these at different intervals. The choice is really up to you. I personally do my oil changes anywhere from every 3,000 to every 5,000 miles, depending on how I'm driving the car during that period. And especially when it comes to oil type, oil brand, oil weight, it's going to be all over the place. Me personally, I've used anything from genuine BMW oil to liquid moly. I've had great results with both of them. And overall, in the oil changes that I've done, I haven't really seen any issues with using either one. Now, it's important to note, especially with your routine maintenance upkeep, there's several things that you would want to look for. It's very important to keep track of where your car is at and when some of these things are due. Just to kind of give you just a quick basic rundown of some of the things you should expect to do during your routine maintenance. Things like your oil change, obviously, as I said. Coolant flush, typically you would want to do that every 2 years. Brake fluid flush is very important. Transmission fluid, this car does have a DCT transmission. Something like that you would expect to do about every 40 to 50,000 miles. And typically you'll be able to purchase a full service kit for that. Websites like FCP Euro and ECS Tuning offer those things anywhere from $500 to $600. Now, other things to consider with routine maintenance, you're going to have things like your spark plugs, your coil packs. These can go bad at any point in time. There are a few brands that I typically recommend when it comes to those things. NGK and Bosch stand out, especially. I know Dynan also makes coil packs for these cars, and it's pretty affordable, around $200 to $300 depending on what you're looking for. Spark plugs as well, you can expect anywhere to spend from $100 to $150. Now, in addition to your DCT transmission service, you'll also expect to do a differential flush. Now, this is pretty straightforward once you have the right tools. Diff fluid on this car can run you anywhere from $50 to $80 per liter, depending on the brand that you choose. And this is something that I'd recommend doing probably around that 60K mark. Right now, my car is at 59,000 miles. I haven't done it since I've owned the car, but it is something that I'm looking to do very, very soon. Now, coming back to the front of the car, there are a few things that I do want to point out that you should look for. And I get this question a lot, especially on YouTube and Instagram. You know, what are some of the main failure points to look out for, especially with these motors? The biggest thing, at least for me, when I'm looking for a car, whether I'm owning it or looking to buy it, is the obvious leaks. Now, obvious leaks can come from anywhere from leaking gaskets to cracked plastic pipes, and this car has a lot of it. Some of the most common failure points for leaks or cracks: your valve cover gasket is prone to leaking at some point in time. Since my ownership, I haven't experienced that, but it is something that can most likely happen during your ownership. Valve cover gaskets are fairly affordable. If you are mechanically savvy, it is a pretty straightforward swap to do. Obviously, making sure that the gasket itself is seated properly, and doing the swap shouldn't take you more than a few hours. Now, cost of the gasket typically runs about $50. I have noticed as well that because the valve cover underneath is plastic, it is prone to being warped at some point in time due to heat exposure. Now, these OEM valve cover replacements can run you anywhere from like $300 to $500 depending on the brand, obviously. Now, another prone failure point, especially for gaskets, is going to come from your oil filter housing. Now, these have a tendency to leak over time. Same thing with your oil thermostat housing as well. Luckily enough, I did replace these with aftermarket variants to improve the reliability and obviously the looks, with the Muscleman oil thermostat and also the Paradigm oil filter cap. Now, these did come with new gaskets, so I was able to swap over everything, and so far no issues. Now, other common failure points that you may or may not see: the oil pan housing gasket is a common thing to expect. I personally haven't experienced that, but I do know other owners who have done so as well. Changing those out can vary from different prices depending on if you're doing it yourself or you take it to a shop. I do know from taking a quick look online that you can find the oil pan gasket for anywhere from about $40 to $60. Now, a couple other small ones to point out: you do have the intake manifold gasket that can go bad over time as well. Again, not something that's too commonly seen, but something that you can expect. And also the O-ring from your charge pipe. Now, luckily enough, I do have a upgraded charge pipe and intercooler from ARM. Charge pipes are one of the most common things to go bad, especially the stock ones, and this is most likely seen when you tune the car. In stock form, it's all plastic. The construction is very flimsy. Over time, it'll be known to crack and break. Now, upgrading a charge pipe allows it to not only be more reliable, but allows it to run more power, especially when you're tuning. Now, continuing the trend of plastic components breaking in the M55B motor, a couple other things you could probably look out to expect: your stock turbo inlet pipe is also made out of plastic. Now, I went ahead and upgraded mine to a Turner Motorsport full aluminum version. Now, this inlet pipe links your air intake directly to the turbo itself. For those of you who are OG subscribers, you'll know when I did the installation for that, when I took out my stock one of the mounting brackets was actually cracked. So it was a good thing that I caught it in time. I'm not 100% sure if it happened before I took it out or while I was taking it out, but it was good to catch it in the moment, and replacing it just like the charge pipe made it that much stronger. When it comes to cooling or failure points in the cooling system, a couple of things you want to look out for: water pump failure, thermostat failure, and also leaking coolant hose lines. Now, these can happen again at any point in your ownership. It is important to note that you're more likely to see a lot of these issues happen, after that 60-70k mile mark. Depending on the previous ownership or your current ownership, it can affect a number of those factors. Now, as I mentioned, I haven't really experienced any of those specific issues, but when I did have my 335i, I did experience some of the coolant lines cracking. This one specifically right here, which runs directly to the radiator. This one burst on me on my 335. It wasn't the hardest thing to replace, but it was definitely a pain to get it removed. Now, I did go ahead and upgrade that to a CSF radiator when I had it, and it came with a new hose and everything. Thankfully enough, the cooling system on the OG M2 and all M cars in general is far more advanced than what you see on your base non-M cars. It's really important to note that this car is built for the racetrack. You know, it has a lot of components that make it that much more stable and that much more reliable for high performance driving. Okay, now this is the OG M2 M Performance exhaust version 1. They came out with 2 versions for this car. Specifically, I have the first version, and a main failure points that I have experienced twice with this car is that I'm not sure if it's the material or the construction of the exhaust itself, but it's prone to cracking. Cracking in such a way that it distorts the sound of the overall muffler, and I experienced this not once but twice. When I first bought the car, it didn't have an issue until about maybe 3 months later. I noticed that there was some vibration noise coming from the car, especially from the tailpipes. Now, I went and looked underneath the car. I noticed that there was a small hairline crack right there where the tailpipes meet the muffler, and I got it warranted, fortunately, when the car still did have warranty at the dealership. That was probably my first and last time bringing the car there. About 2.5 years later, this was right before Invasion, I had the same experience again. Now bear in mind guys, they put a brand new exhaust on this car, and the same exact crack in the same exact location came back. Now this time I wasn't able to warranty it, but I did carry it to a friend of mine, WTF Motorsports, and they were able to weld it up and reinforce it, and everything has been good so far. But just to note, if you do have this exhaust, especially the version 1, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have probably experienced it as well. Okay, now I know I have to mention this because I know I'm going to get the comments saying, why didn't I talk about this? Why didn't I speak about that? Guys, again, this is based on my personal experience. Even though I haven't experienced a lot of issues, there are some issues that would be possible or likely, especially when owning a car like this. The number 1 on the list is rod bearings. Do you need to change your rod bearings on N55 M2? Yes and no. I personally haven't met any M2 owner that's needed to do it. However, I have seen on the forums and in certain discussions where folks who have the N55 motor in other cars of them having to do it. Now, this is typically in higher mileage cars. I personally warm my car up to temperature every time I go for a drive. Personally don't think that it's a very common issue, especially on the N55B motor. You're more likely to see it on something like the S65 that comes in the E9X M3, but this is not to say that it won't happen. I don't see it as a major thing that you need to look out for. Now, another issue I want to highlight, and I know I'm going to get the comments about it, I have gotten questions about it in the past, is what about the crank hub? Now, personally, I don't think the N55 is very susceptible to the crank hub failure. I know you're most likely to see it in the S55 motors that come in the M3 and the M4. Now, just because it isn't a very common issue, that doesn't mean there aren't ways that you can safeguard it. I know you can upgrade your crank hub if needed. There is a crank hub bolt capture that you can also install on the car. Now, both of them aren't necessarily things that are very easy to install. I'd more recommend you doing it in a shop. But as far as you upgrading your car, I won't necessarily put that on the first step of your checklist. Now, these are high performance machines. I'm not gonna stand there and tell you that if you don't modify your car, you'll be fine completely. Failure points can happen at any point in time, at any stage in your build. For me, I personally did it where I wanted to do my build in stages. I wanted to do things that would upgrade the performance, but I also wanted to do things that would be preventative maintenance, such as upgrading some of the main failure points. As I mentioned, anything that's plastic or brittle, I replaced it to something metal or carbon fiber, making sure that all of the gaskets are new, checking your valve cover regularly. I do regular oil changes, so when doing the oil changes, you want to make sure that you're checking your oil, seeing if there's any metal shavings in that, and that could be a good or a bad indicator of where your car is at. Over my 3 years, can I say my M2 has been reliable? Yes, yes I can. And thankfully, I haven't spent too much on maintenance, I can quickly give you guys an idea of what my total maintenance cost has been over the past 3 years, with oil changes, with making some upgrades to some of the known parts that do break. I would say roughly, happily, and thankfully that it's been probably under $1,000. Now, with that being said, it doesn't necessarily mean that your personal car will have the same look. It might be you got an older M2 with more miles, with an owner that previously abused the car. All of those factors can tie into your personal experience, but I just want to let you guys know that the journey doesn't have to be all sour. I have had a lot of good experiences with owning the car. It's been solid for the most part. I've never really had it break down on me, left me on the side of the road, thankfully. And I hope that, you know, throughout the rest of my ownership, it continues to treat me well. And in saying that, I also want to treat the car with the same respect. Now, in conclusion, I just want to say that in ownership of any car, especially OG M2, make sure you enjoy it. But in doing so, upgrade it with the right parts and make sure you're on top of your maintenance. Don't neglect it. If you're unsure about where your car stands as far as maintenance wise, make sure to go through it thoroughly before you start doing mods. It's very important to know that these cars, they can be very finicky, but they can also be very good for the most part. I hope that everyone on their journey just enjoys it for the most part. Me personally, I've enjoyed it and I look forward to making way more memories with it. The car has been fantastic to own and I would definitely recommend this car specifically, the OG M2, as a car to get if you're starting off in your BMW journey. Now, with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this video up. If you thought it was helpful or insightful, please share your comments down below. If you have any other personal experiences with the N55B motor specifically, whether good or bad, we'd love to hear about it. Before I go, I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have a website, MotoGeargarage.com, where you can get hoodies, merchandise, performance parts for your BMW, and anything in between. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Tune in for more geared up content. Until then, guys, we're gone.